Hi, everyone, and welcome. Um, I just going to say a quick few notes. My name is Georgie Mihai, and I am the Assistant Director of Marketing at the Wick Poetry Center. We are very excited to hear Darren Demaree read tonight for us, and just wanted to let you all know that there's going to be a Q&A at the end, um, and then we'll be able to you will be able to give us some chat um, questions in the chat box, or you can just talk. You just have to let us know by raising your hand on the Zoom app. Um, the live streaming will not work tonight, so I apologize for that. There are some technical difficulties. This is being recorded and will be uploaded to YouTube as soon as the reading is over. So it will be on. It's just not going to be live. So I apologize for that, but all is good, and I think we are ready to start. David, what do you think?
Awesome. Thank you, Georgie. Welcome, everybody. My name is David Hassler, Director of the Wick Poetry Center, and we are really thrilled to welcome tonight Darren Demaree, who will be giving a reading in just a few moments, but we came out of an extraordinary conversation that he had with a large group of us at 5:30 around addiction, recovery, and creativity. Um, this event, both the talk and the reading tonight, is co-sponsored by the Kent United Church of Christ and by Ralph and Judy Kletzian, who have made this possible with generous support in memory of their son, Peter. I'd like to ask Pastor Amy Gopp, the senior pastor of the United Church of Christ, to say a few words of welcome, and then I will briefly introduce Darren. Pastor Amy?
Thank you, David. Welcome to you all. We are so thrilled that you've joined us this evening. On behalf of the Kent United Church of Christ, as David mentioned, I serve as the senior pastor there, and Wick Poetry Center is such an important partner of ours in our community. We continue our co-sponsorship of these poetry readings and writing workshops, particularly on addiction and recovery and healing and creativity and spirituality. So we thank Wick Poetry Center and our very own David Hassler, who does belong to Kent UCC, and a special thanks to Darren, who just gave us such a gift in the last hour. And I know that you all will be delighted by his reading tonight. So thank you all and welcome.
Oop, I am muted and now I'm not. Thank you, Pastor Amy. And just a few words about Darren, who grew up in Mount Vernon, Ohio. He graduated from the College of Wooster, Miami University, where he got a master's, and then came to Kent State University to get a master's in library science, and now is working at the Columbus Metropolitan Library system, living in Columbus, Ohio with his wife and his children. Darren is the author 2 weeks ago in his bio of 15 full-length collections of poems, but informed us tonight he now can add another, so 16th, having just signed a contract for his newest book of poetry. He is the recipient of the 2018 Ohio Arts Council Individual Excellence Award, the Louise Bogan Award from Trio House Press, and the Nancy Drew Taylor Award from Emrys Journal. He's the editor-in-chief of the Best of the Net Anthology and managing editor of Ovenbird Poetry. As Pastor Amy said, he gave an incredible talk to us just an hour and a half ago, talking about the importance of community and how we cannot be healthy alone, but need our communities to strengthen us. And his story, which some of which he'll share in his poems tonight, made me think of a quote from a Spanish poet, and I just found who said, Jamie Gildebima, who said, I believed I wanted to be a poet, but deep down in my heart, I realized I wanted to be a poem. What we're going to hear tonight with Darren Demaree is both a poet and a living poem. and feel that positive energy in our community here in Kent. Thank you, Darren, and welcome everyone tonight.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Amy. In keeping with some of the conversation from the last hour, I wanted to open tonight with a passage from Two Towns Over, the closing section of the book, entitled Ode to the Corner of the Drug House Down the Gravel Road Off the Two-Lane Highway. And I've learned that it is always best to read the longest poem first so that you get to the end, you don't have the wind for it. So this is the whole section of the book. Inhale the world. The whole world is in this wood paneling. I see it. It's looking at me with a fake eye, a knot that is more sigh than any yellow moon. Fingernails like lost blossoms, I have carved all of my names into what I cannot get back. Homemade magic is actual magic. I love deeply how simple my life has become with only corners to contend with. I roll my shoulders and I am the epic. The crumbling is the mountain climbing you. So many little explosions in the intimacy of the intrusive craft. And now there are more people here to watch me lose my common speech. I've come back here to stay lost here. And now the girl my sister beat out on the tennis team shows up with 2 packages of corn tortillas. Sure, I'll have one. The fear is in the cup. The joy is in the river. I'm in the plastic tub in the middle of the front lawn. There's piss everywhere. I can see forgiveness is an ending that exists outside of the elements. The awful man does awful things. I know this. And yet I cannot flag the boxer in my own heart. I cannot ask the crowd why I'm here. All smoke from floor to ground. I fought an enemy the drugs gave me. That's how drugs work. And while I filled light times with darkness, I lost to conquest. I fought dragons that were on the television. These in-crowd alliances are worthless. I don't even get a discount on the wolf. Some clouds never pass. Some clouds grow roots in your chest and funnel the rain into the barrel that once held your id. I slosh with the nature of my own lost ego. I'm nothing, being filled up with something from just south of your heavens, hardened in the air. My mouth has gone thin with the season, which is no longer fall, no longer winter. This season is Ohio. This season is the drug season. The body count is the same as what it would take to remove the context of the stars in the sky. The fence is made of dirty carpets, and yet rarely does anyone escape. Blue, orange, and the empty chicken nugget bags we turned into bases, while the tobacco pieces of our soul stopped us from running too fast around the living room. We played 1/2 of 1 inning, and that is how the television got busted up. Hat on a hat, Tiki's virtual reality setup lasted for an hour before we tossed it in the retention pond. He'd driven to Columbus and robbed 3 houses before he could get that at the Radio Shack, and then the flat black and gold coloring freaked out his little brother a little too much. I think I prefer the simple drugs working through the simple body, but I felt bad he went through all of that to watch a quick drowning of a technology we never understood. From here, the valley looks like a good fever. How fantastic the translation of heroin on a good man's thoughts, light eaten from the inside and framed so perfectly that an actual haunting will occur. Each moment tastes like a foreign tongue exploring my soul and refusing to be gentle as it refuses to take me with it. I can see the moon from here. I can see it turn away as well. I have seen so many names that nobody is willing to say out loud anymore. Bruises on top of bruises. I can't get any more down than I already am, officer. Sure, I'll eat the carpet. There are a lot of chips down here. Fuck you. I'm doing what you told me to do. I know how long the chips have been down here. The eye of the haven from the outside looks like a slit, an uneager wound in a terrible house. And from the back of this car, I can feel no prelude. I can see no future. That corner never knew me sober. I feel loss will find me once this wears off. And then what will I get to look out of? I used to see all of Ohio through that damage. I could smell the water from the retention pond turning against me. So that is the closing section of Two Towns Over. It feels good to go back to that one. It's been a while since I got to read from it, but it was befitting for this evening and the conversation that we had at 5:30. I wanted to take that place as a place to pivot into the better spots that poetry and in my life has brought me. So I'm going to read some 8 or 9 poems from Emily as Sometimes the Forest Wants the Fire, which is a book that came out last year from Harpoon Books, published here in Columbus, Ohio. So yay. So I'm going to read a few from this, and I have a few poems from my A Child Walks in the Dark manuscript that I'm going to close with tonight to bring us full circle, I think, in the total conversation we've had this evening. Emily is Underneath the Train. Think of what we will see, Emily said. It could be the whole country, she said. We could live in 100 different towns and be 100 different people and love each other 100 different ways. And if we ever find a diner with the perfect piece of rhubarb pie, we will stay there forever. We can have 100 children there. Can't we just be robbers? I asked quietly. I always, when I read this poem, shout out a gentleman named TJ Neer who works at the Book Loft here in Columbus. This is his all-time favorite. So I try to read it when I can in hopes it'll buoy his spirits wherever he is, whatever he's doing. Emily is Elsewhere Sunflowers. I've traveled to leave Emily, presence in places she might one day be. If she's never there, then the yellow I've left behind will grow as a gift to the places that missed her. Emily as a Puma crosses. One of the best things when you're taking real things from your life is when you get to lie about them. Part of the fun of these poems is they might emanate from real places and real feelings and real experiences. But if you can tweak that ever so and have fun with it. So this is one of those poems where I got to fib a little bit, but it still sums up Emily and our relationship pretty well. This is Emily as a Puma crosses. A day without the tan rags of Ohio. I saw Emily walk naked across our front lawn. She was drunk, aware that we can't have drunks in our house anymore. And without a single tear or regret for her state, she stalked our home, moving faster, smoother, without a look to the neighbors that were lining up to see the last bit of her girlishness be swallowed up by time and her inebriation. It takes an hour for each drink to vanish from our system, and at dawn, Emily knocked on the door, still naked, still a mother of 2, yet somehow more dangerous than she had been before. She napped all day. I didn't want to shake her, for what if she was still dreaming as a girl, as a Puma, without fear? Emily, as we bought a parachute at a garage sale. This poem sums up marriage pretty well to me in terms of our adventures together and sort of how you take the day to day and sort of how you goad each other. Sometimes you goad your partner and sometimes it's fun. And this is one of those circumstances. Emily, as we bought a parachute at a garage sale. The air favors the prepared. And yet, when the original owner said that it didn't work, that the sheeting was all torn up inside, we bought it anyway. Emily said that she could sew it up, that I could learn the mechanics of the chute, and then we will have stolen the safe delivery from any height of heaven. I asked, are we really going to use this thing? No, never, she said. It just looks like fun. That's what you said when I asked you to marry me. That was when she kissed me, etc. There's one of my favorite poets is named Ovenbird. And if you ever get a chance to read her book, Dark Matter, or With Deer, I highly encourage getting to check out those books. So there are some of these poems in here. This book itself represents about 12 years of these Emily poems, which is sort of my more natural voice and what I return to in between these large projects, these big swings I try to take. And so this is Emily as written by Ovenbird. I believe in the relative success of the synapse. And if Emily wants to be part of that crackling, she will pop to join me past the dimensional leanings of her present. If Emily is entirely real and here, we will see her. There's a literary magazine called Thrush, which I've been very lucky to be in a few times. Helen Vittoria is the editor there, and she's incredible. And they put out really fantastic issues. And I've been lucky to be in it a few times. And she really likes these short Emily poems. So I wanted to read one of those tonight. Emily is measureless. I know how many hand lengths she is. I don't know how to stop measuring. Emily is a leveling of ground. Across the snow, the sea change of Ohio, the axe splits the wood as an empty threat to the whole world. But then again, hands can motion the life right out of this thing. Personally involved in the end of the world, what the living do is command the rags and muscles to be easy with pleasure, to take the blanket and pull it over all heads, to kick legs like an ornery child, a knowing child with a flat surface, to give in to an eyelid. I found Emily. That means I'm ready for the rest of you to close your eyes. I have a poetry friend who may be in the audience tonight. He said he might try to make it, named Sam Roxas Chua, who does incredible things in poetry and asemic writing, and is just a splendid artist in total. And I wrote a poem in this book and dedicated it to him, just in amazement for the things that he does, and tried to approach it in not the same practice that he does, but in my way, but in honor of him. So this poem is called Emily as the Audacity of the Red Egg, for Sam Roxas Chua. The sun is never white. The chest collects only breakable bones. Each new day carries with it a tribe so native to this moment, the wars do not have time to fill our throats with a second cry. I look to focus my eyes on the landscape, and the fog that once hugged Ohio charges me. I relax my gaze, and I see Emily as a red egg paused on the impossible tip of love. I see her in defiance of all want. A table cannot starve. Emily is a Bosque pear. I've got about 4 or 5 of these more, and then I'm going to end with a couple from A Child Walks in the Dark, and then be excited to get to talk to you folks for a little while. Just give me about 10 more minutes of fun here, and then we'll get the dialogue going. Emily is a Bosque pear. There is a true shape displaced and claimed by the delusion, and the delusion's comrade. And if all that soil still tastes honeyed amidst the claim that all love is fruit, then whatever skin is left over, that is the skin Emily is wearing. She will always be a visiting blood held together by my poor metaphors. She drips and I call it juice. She sings and I call it a garden. I open my eyes and I know all that's been ruined is my understanding. Highly encourage, as I'm reading all these, you folks to meet Emily at some point. She's the best. There's some at the end I'd like to finish in terms of the Emily book. But I always like to read this one. For any of you folks studying poetry and in any sort of creative writing, your teachers know a lot of what they're talking about. Sometimes they don't. I started writing and publishing these Emily poems a long time ago, and I'd gotten so many of them published that an old teacher of mine sent me an email and asked if I'd consider stop writing the Emily poems. that maybe I'd written too many of them. Maybe it was a trope that had been worn out. I think they wanted to see what I could do in other arenas, and I kind of went with both. I kept writing these. This is the closest thing to my own poetic voice. And then I like to push myself to write other very long sequences or prose poems. But at the time when I was sent the email, I responded somewhat crassly in a poem that I sent in return. And this sort of ended the discussion. And I think they understood that I was going to keep writing these as I did with this book, which we edited down from, I think initially Maggie Smith helped me get it down from 150 or so pages, and got it down. We got it down under just over 100 here. So we're making progress. But my response to the email from the old professor was this poem. So please allow me one more slip of profanity and we'll move forward. This poem is called Emily as I Hold Three of Her Shoes. I would write poems about swans if I gave a shit about swans. The swans you're thinking of, do they have anything to do with Emily? So I get endless joy from that poem, and the idea that, you know, maybe I'd written enough Emily poems. The Emily poems are just they're gonna keep coming. All right. So towards the end of this, three of my favorite are you want to end with a good uppercut. And so these last three of the last poems of this book are some of my all-time favorites. There's a poet named Leslie Harrison, who, if you haven't read her work, her collection, A Book of Endings, is ground-shaking, life-altering work. I spent 6 months reading this book over and over again. It's one of my all-time favorites. And one of the things, as I try to keep being a part of this community, when someone writes something or does something that blows my mind, because if you spend enough time with poetry, you can sort of retroactively figure out what they did to make it good and why you like it. When someone writes something like Ase Berg or Leslie Harrison here, that you just can't quite figure out why it's as brilliant as it is, it's almost a mystical sort of thing. That's when poetry dips into almost religious terms for me. And Leslie Harrison's A Book of Endings is one of those books that I'll never be able to shake it. It's incredible. And as a thank you for what she gave me in writing that book and the experience that I've had with it over and over again, I sent her this poem as a thank you. So this is Emily as a Book of Endings for Leslie Harrison. I chose Emily because I knew that if she chose me, I could prepare for death in a way that made my desperation to keep living something tangible. Now, with each child we have, I am cemented in the panic of the living. Now, since she keeps choosing me every morning, I am able to taunt mortality in a way that will leave claw marks in the fields of Ohio. How glorious it will be to be dragged from the living and to scream one name, to spit one name at my weakening grip, to expect the strength to return to me, just like the thousands of other times I've used her name to live longer. The last two from this book, and then you'll allow me a last flashpoint of hope for these poems from A Child Walks in the Dark. The second to last one from this book is Emily as She Dropped the Lantern at My Feet. One of the parts of the dialogue we had at in the 5:30 workshop was about saying yes to things and finding a way to reach out for hope and for living and creativity and different things, finding a purpose outside of addiction, finding a purpose in this community here for this reading and before at 5:30. And this poem sums it up well for me. What you're willing to do to keep saying yes to the people that you love and to keep saying yes to getting to be part of groups like this. It's a beautiful thing when you can find a way to pay attention to groups like this. So this is Emily as She Dropped the Lantern at My Feet. I always wear cotton just in case Emily needs me to go up in flames. I get to be the one that holds her fire. How tender of her to choose me from the crashing to burn just enough for her to lead our children to safety. How terrible it must be for a man to have less of a purpose than to be burned like me. The last poem from this book that I'm going to read is the poem that got this whole book published. I've gotten to have a lot of conversations with Gary Lovely, who's the publisher from Harpoon Books, and he and I were fans of each other, and he had loved Two Towns Over and some other things that I'd written. But when he started a press and was trying to choose from these hundreds of choices, what book was going to be the first Harpoon book, he was considering this one. And when he got to this last poem, as it's been explained to me, this was the poem that got him to say, yeah, this is the one. This is the first book I'm going to get to publish. And that means the world to me. And this book being published because of the content, because of the topic, because of what Emily means to me and what exploring our relationship through poetry, nothing, for all the books I'll get to publish, hopefully more. I can't think of one that's going to mean more to me than the ones I've read for you folks tonight. Two Towns Over, getting to explore addiction, and Emily as Sometimes the Forest Wants the Fire, and how important and special and what writing these poems has taught me as an artist, and as a husband as well. I suppose she likes it with the lies. She thinks it makes her a little extra ornery, and she is, but in secret ways. So this is Emily as a Smile Would Have Ruined the Picture. And it ties together a lot of the things we've talked about tonight. There was one look, one picture of Emily in a bathtub right before we got married. She was traveling with her family. She was in Madrid or Paris or Istanbul. She had been gone for a couple of weeks, so I had been drunk for a couple of weeks. And she knew that I had been drunk for a couple of weeks. So she sent me a picture of her in the bathtub, one breast covered, hair in a way I'd never seen before, looking directly at the faucet. And so surely did the tatters of my world collect into a whole woman so beautiful that when I got the picture, I accidentally deleted the picture. I remember it clearly, though, her face, elegant, angry that she didn't have her hands wrapped around the back of my head to pull me off the bottle. She wanted to bury me in her beauty, and that almost worked too well. I am sober. I don't have the picture. I have Emily. She looks at me now. So it's always a good night when I get to read from that book. I wanted to end tonight. I've finished a collection, and it's making the rounds, and it's one of those ornery things where it keeps being a finalist here and a finalist there, and hopefully this will be a real live book someday. But a couple of poems from my collection, A Child Walks in the Dark, seemed like the best place to end what has been a pretty beautiful night for me. And thank you again to everyone at the Wick Poetry Center for inviting me. Thank you to the church. Thank you to Reverend Amy. Thank you for those supporting the arts and putting these communities together, because they can do a lot for each other. This combination of those in recovery and the arts community, we really can hold each other up more so than I think a lot of people realize. So a night like this is pretty incredible for me, and it feels great to be a part of it. So I'm going to end with a couple of these prose poems from A Child Walks in the Dark. And then I'm excited for whoever wants to get to talk poetry. I'm happy to answer questions. Again, I work at a public library, which is a lot of fun, but it doesn't lend to a lot of poetry talk, even if I'm trying hard sometimes. So the second to last poem is called Those Junk Plums. I told my children those junk plums left at the bottom of the grocery bag were not perfect when we put them in the bag, but they were on sale and good enough for a family that doesn't get many plums. So now that they are mangled and losing their juice to the bottom of the thin green bag I struggled so mightily to remove from the dispenser, we are still going to cup their mangled flesh in our hands. We are still going to eat them, however inelegant that might be. We are going to pour the remnants into a tiny cup. We are going to celebrate the fact that there is still fruit in the world. That won't always be the case. And finally, in placing me and my own work and then the discussions tonight, I wanted to end in this and visit how I might be found later on as I think about my life and think about my creative practice, when I think about my family. This whole book is these little lessons and promises to my children, and trying to invert expectations from them. At a certain point saying, hey, if you're going to be pirates, tell me, I'll be a pirate with you. If you want to be artists, let's be artists. Just tell me what I need to do to help. Trying to invert and combat gender expectations, trying to essentially align myself with them as much as possible. I'm their dad. I love them. I let Emily drop the lantern at my feet, right? And so this poem, hopefully someday when they're older and they're flipping through all these books, that's what this poem is about. And so thank you again for giving me a chance to read poetry. It is one of my all-time favorite things to do. Getting to see you folks and getting to talk after this is a gift as well. So thank you. This is You Might Choose to Read These Poems. I told my children you might choose to read these poems in the bareness and anxiety of your young adulthood, while you search for me in the thousands and thousands of poems I've written, so that I could explore, so that I could explain, so that I could hide and lie about some small terribleness. And it gives me endless joy that you will find me right here, right now, as bare as you are, but feeling no anxiety at all, because I am with my children in some small way. In the future, when I love you even more than I already do, because that's how real love works. It grows with the epic. It encircles the epic until you cannot tell why or how any of this began, but you know, if there is such a thing as a soul, it exists for moments like this. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Darren. Beautiful. Please don't ever stop writing those Emily poems and showing us how love works. Let's open this up for questions. As Georgie mentioned, you can use the chat function. I mean, yes, you could send a question to the chat, or raise hands for questions as well. And then Georgie will unmute you if you raise your hand.
Georgie, can I get us started?
Yes, Charlie, you don't even need my permission.
I know, I just want to follow the rules. You talked a little bit about, your work in the library and how that doesn't always lead to good poetry conversations. And I saw Gabriella in the chat, so that has inspired her work a lot. And, when I see the range of your work, what you've shared and how productive you've been, I wonder if you could talk about the relationship between your job and your creative practice a little bit.
Part of it is getting to work in a public library and getting to focus on the community sometimes doesn't quite lend itself to putting poetry books in people's hands. But that's a small part of what, if I worked at an academic library, say, I imagine there'd be more teaching, more instruction. If you had me in your academic library, I'd be doing some poetry things, I'm sure. But getting to work at a public library is much more about the folks that come in and what they need and how I can help them. And so what happens is, if someone ever comes in and shows even the smallest interest in poetry, I go way overboard. I'm like, here are these 10 books. Here are these. And so in terms of it being part of my practice, I think I am getting to learn more about what the public looks for in terms of what they're reading, and in terms of getting to experience. At the 5:30 hour, I talked a lot about empathy, and getting to work that muscle a lot at a public library, and trying to be that best version of yourself. Now, poetically speaking, you're not always trying to put the best face on things or try to show yourself to be your best, but it is still trying to find a way to exalt sometimes and explore. Sometimes it's about the language. Sometimes it's about trying to show how these small moments can balloon into really important things. So I think it informs it that way. We had a question, can you talk about research and poetry? Yeah, so this is one of the things I like to do. I've written several books that took a long time to research. Temporary Champions, which was about the Duck Koo Kim, Ray Mancini title fight, took a lot of research. The Bombing the Thinker book, I spent a lot of time up the Cleveland Museum of Art and studying how those things took place, how people decided to stick dynamite into one of the original casts of Rodin's Thinker legs. And then unfortunately they wrote their message that was blown up. So the research part of it is one of the challenges. I always like to find a new way to approach something poetically. So right now I've been writing a lot of these political prose poems where, like in the Child Walks in the Dark poems, I'll repeat phrases as refrains because you can do things musically with them differently. And research lends itself to, like in the Bombing the Thinker book, I give a voice to the disembodied, blown up thinker. And how does it feel to be the child of Rodin and be cast aside, and to be art when people at that point in the Vietnam War were not valuing art? They were saying, and this is what the Weathermen, the folks that blew up the Thinker, were saying, is we need food, we don't need art. And where they was wrong is art can be nourishing as well. So the research component is always something I'm fascinated in. And it lends itself. I highly encourage poets to go pick something completely outside themselves and learn about it and see if it brings them anything new to write about it. It might not. For me, I get fascinated by something and I go down the rabbit hole. Sometimes it's 6 months or a year, but I'm working on other things at the same time, and sort of always keeps going. Poets, way to engage it. I think libraries, for the most part, do a pretty good job of bringing people in. At our library, we have a lot of times where we'll celebrate Black History Month and we'll make sure to feature the work of Black poets, and trying to make sure that the youth that come into the library, Columbus Metropolitan Library is a very youth-centered, youth-focused library system, and trying to make sure that they get to experience poetry and rhyming and sounds and all those different parts of it that are really a lot of fun, and they get exposed to people who work in poetry. So I think those connections get made pretty well. In terms of getting people to the second floor and selecting a book of poetry, I work overtime on that sometimes. But people have different interests, and if they show any the slightest wiggle where poetry might be something they're interested in, I'm all over it.
Mary, you can ask your question.
Can you
Mary
see
Hellman.
me? Because there's nothing lit up.
I can hear you,
see
Mary.
me? Okay. I'm a poet as well.
Mhm.
And the one thing that I have got in touch with, I'm writing a book, is the necessity to allow time for silence.
Mhm.
How much does silence play a part in creating your works?
Well, one of the strategies, and when you think about words and sounds and things like that, it can all be sort of consuming and cluttering. One of the best things that you can do if you know how to use music and poetry is you know when to take it away. That's some of the best endings to poems, are when you lead someone up to some sort of resolution elegantly and then pull the rug. So I think silence has its place, in, especially in terms of strategy in poetry. I think in terms of practice, while you're trying to write poetry, finding a place to be creative can involve silence. For me, it's a big strategy with having 3 kids and one of them needing to be napping to get anything done. And so to tap into that, for me, what works best is a song on repeat to try to sort of zen yourself out a little bit. But I think silence works lots of different ways in poetry, and I think especially in practice, you find those things. And in the 5:30 hour, I talked a lot about poetry being a physical thing. Like, it's something we do with our bodies, right? We type, we move, we do all these things. And you find the avenues into your practice that allow you to be productive. For me, it might be a repeated song, or I have a little bit of sugar or coffee or one of those things to get writing. For you, it could be silence. It could be meditation. It could be landscape. A lot of people get their work done really well looking out the window. Mine is more of a concentrated time where I have X amount of time to get anything done. So I sort of use the things I know work, but a lot of people, it's just finding what works for you. So if silence is one of the avenues that gives you a chance to work on that book and work on new poems, then that's fantastic. It takes so long to find what works for you in a practice.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I see Casey. Evening, Casey. Researching and exploring. One of the ways that, especially in some of the long sequences, so I like to, if it's a long sequence on one topic, I like to map it out, where it's going to be 124 poems on this, and I will map out the sound and path and where I'm trying to get. Because if you're trying to write a book that is ultimately that long with that many poems, you can get lost very easily. So I do a lot of mapping of where I'm going to try to get the energy going, or turn it down, put in that silence that we talked about, Mary, and try to be strategic with my planning. Because if you don't have a spine, a backbone in some of these big swings I'm taking, the reader will just, they'll give up. They'll get lost in what you're trying to do if you don't have a repeated phrase or a spine to work through. It doesn't work so well with research things because you're trying to adapt to things that actually happened in the world. But in one of the books, like the Burning It Down book that just came out, that was a political sequence about trying to advocate for healthcare, essentially. If in that narrative there weren't repeated phrases or energy ebbing and flowing, then it's either going to wear the reader out or they're going to get lost in it. So I try to make sure that in those long sequences, I map things out pretty specifically. Just takes a lot of extra preparation, unfortunately. Build small. Small libraries always have the best characters. That's true. Hey, Emily. How often does music inspire me to write? It does, just because I like to engage in different things. Emily Caldwell here is someone that I know, and you get inspired by different things you listen to, and you try to fit it into what it is you're trying to speak on. So Emily once asked me to listen to the new Taylor Swift album. And it was one of the things where I found I was uninterested, and then the presidential debate came up, and I was like, you know what? I'm not going to watch that. I'm going to put on the new Taylor Swift album. And they ended up melding into each other in a poem I'm pretty proud of. But music can do that. Sometimes you need music without lyrics. I mentioned the Bill Evans trio earlier. My number one go-to for that is a band called Explosions in the Sky, which does these sort of rolling soundtracky sort of albums that do a lot of things that I'm trying to do in some of the long sequences. So music informs things a lot, and it's a big inspiration. I talked about at the 5:30 hour plays and paintings and movies and different things like that. If you're paying attention and trying to take those steps to say yes creatively, a lot of things are going to grab you. That's for sure. I've been awakening. You know what? With the 3 kids, with the job, and with trying to stay active and writing, I sleep pretty well when the sleep comes to me. We also have 3 dogs, so sometimes I'm woken up by them. But I had a creative writing professor who always did their best writing in the morning and in the evening. So they always kept a pad by their bed, and right before they go to bed, that idea would come, and they knew that they had to put it down, otherwise they'd lose it. So I think that's for a lot of people, you sort of get hit. But for me, once I get a chance to get into my nice, soft, warm bed, I try to stay there and sleep. So been awake on a certain subject. I write about lots of subjects. I'm not certain.
I think we have time for one or two more questions or comments from folks. Oh, here we go. In the Q&A thread is a question from Casey. Can you read that, Darren?
Oh, sure.
Q&A section.
Oh, that was one of the ones I tried to address earlier.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Tina, do you have a question?
Yeah. Hey. Hi.
Hi.
I lost y'all for a minute.
Oh, well, welcome back.
It rejoined. It never does that to me. Well, I'm much more of a visual. I was asking that because it's happened to me, and so I was wondering if you had been awakened in the middle of the night by spirit to write something. And obviously that don't happen for you. Do you see what I'm getting? It just wakes you up and you got to write with the pad, because a friend had me do it. Hasn't happened lately, I think, because of things that have been going on in my world. 08, 09, I was just waking and I had to write it. It wouldn't let me sleep it wouldn't let me go back to sleep until I wrote.
No, I understand that feeling. I have been in the car, or I have been different places where writing was not taking place, and an idea, a phrase or something like that. I had one of the books, The Many Full Hands of Plotting Inelegantly, which was a book made up of these 3 humanist sequences I'd written, was a title that I came up with driving in the car and had to voice text it to myself so that I wouldn't lose it.
Exactly.
So there's a lot of things like that happen where you get struck with something. I'll email it to myself. I'm like, I'm going to forget it. If I write it down, I'll lose the piece of paper. So I'll email it to myself. That way, the next time I go back to correspond with editors or anything like that, it'll be there just staring at me.
Okay, that's a good thing. I'm glad you said that
Yeah.
because I tried to tell Spirit not to do that with me while I'm driving, because if I'm on my way to some, of course I have to pull over with the book and
I get that.
get
You
it
don't
from
want to
under
start
my
a
seat. Yeah.
you don't want to start writing while you're driving. So
Right.
I found these little cheats. Part of it is also I have terrible handwriting, just absolutely just terrible handwriting. So if I try to write anything down, it could read as anything later on. So I try to type it, try to text it, try to make sure it's legible. I can pull one of these real quick. On my old computer here is a note my daughter wrote me that says, "You need handwriting classes." So that's sort of the level I'm at, where my fifth grade daughter's like, "All right, Dad, you got to work on this."
Yeah, I have to write. If I type, I would lose everything. I'm a better
Well,
writer.
that's the physical part I was talking about. You figure out physically what you need to do to be creative. For me, it's that clack, it's that sound and the motion, and that helps me write. For you and a lot of people, it's handwriting things before you ever get to the computer. That's for sure.
Well, thank you, love. Appreciate that.
Yes, ma'am. I
That
appreciate
helps
the
out
question.
when I'm in the car. Great.
There's Carolyn. Hi, Carolyn. Favorite way to physically write is I really don't even try to take notes anymore handwriting wise. So all of my writing is on the computer. Honestly, when I was younger, I would try to handwrite things, like if I was in class and things like that, and it would always get lost and mangled and wouldn't be quite as good. So if you see me with a very sort of serious look on my face, I don't try to write at the library very often. Normally I'm trying to decompress if I'm not helping folks. Getting to talk to you, Carolyn, sometimes it's pretty fantastic. But almost all of my writing is exclusively on the computer. It's part of the physical thing, and it's legible, which is a key to writing, being able to read what you've written.
Darren, thank you this evening, both at 5:30 and now this evening, for sharing such generous spirit and your creative voice. It's really resonated, I think, with so many of us, and we're deeply appreciative and want to stay connected to you well long into the future. I want to also, before we close, just announce some other events and readings that the Wick Poetry Center has coming up, because we have a lot. And it's about building community. In fact, tomorrow night, our own Charlie Malone, Program and Outreach Manager, will be leading a workshop called Untranslatable, an Ode to the Mother Tongue. There's international students involved. Everyone's welcome. And it's kind of in anticipation of the International Mother Tongue Day, which is in about 2 weeks. So if you go to events.travelingstanzas.com or go to the Wick Poetry Center website and click on the reading series, you'll see all of these events and readers. We have also a series of workshops called Black Voices Matter in honor of Black History Month. And our next workshop will be a week from this Friday, with an open mic for the community on February 26th. We have Padre Otuma, who is now produces the podcast Poetry Unbound for Krista Tippett's On Being. He'll be here on March 17th with a workshop and a reading that people can sign up for, and Naomi Shiabnai, who will be here on April 7th with a workshop and a reading. And then Charlie's Outreach Poetry in the Schools class will culminate online, like everything in our lives, for this whole year, with the Giving Voice reading of children and of all ages from our community on April 27th. So that's what we have on deck. But Darren, your reading, your gathering with us tonight has been community building for us, and that's salvational. That's meaning healthy. That's a salve, as Pastor Amy Gott mentioned, and we thank you for that, Darren.
Thank you for having me, folks.
thank you all, and hope to see you all again soon at the Wick Poetry Center events. Good night.